This presentation is on communicating effectively. Some prerequisites before you begin this presentation, some things you need to have done beforehand. I would suggest that you view the rhetorical triangle video that's already been posted. I'd also like for you to read the statement by the Alabama clergyman that was written to Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. Then read the letter from Birmingham Jail, which was a response to those clergymen. Also read King's I Have a Dream speech, and if possible, try to view the speech as well. But read it as you view it, or read it first and then view it. But check them out from both perspectives. If you're in my class, I probably made these texts available to you. If not, then you should look through Wikipedia and YouTube, and you should be able to find them. But all of these will become relevant later in the discussion, and you'd be benefited if you'd already had some experience with all of them before continuing. When we decide we want to communicate, and for the most part, I'll be discussing writing here, but it applies to any form of communication. But we need to know when we're communicating, we need to have a starting point. But where is that starting point? What information do we need before we can communicate? What do we need to know or have prepared before we can start the writing process, for example? I think there are three things that everyone needs before they can communicate effectively. Okay, and that would be first the purpose, a reason, the audience, so we'll know to whom we're communicating, and what I call the occasion, which is the circumstance under which you're communicating, or how the information is going to be received by the audience, and some other factors play into that, and I want to explain that in more careful detail later in the presentation. So just keep that in mind, that the purpose, the audience, the occasion, these are the three things you need before you can begin effectively communicating. To talk about the purpose first, we need a reason to write or communicate. What's the reason that what reason do we have to begin a communication or to begin writing? There are a couple of ways we come about these. Perhaps we've been assigned a topic to cover by our professor or our supervisor or boss. Someone's given us the topic that we need to pursue, and that's always an easy way, because then you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking up, well, what do I want to say? What do I have to say? Someone's telling you. An alternative to this is that you may have been asked to develop your own topic. A lot of times as you advance in college, even in the job, in your career, you may be challenged with having to develop your own purpose that you want to write, from which you want to write a report or conduct some sort of investigation on your own. Anytime we'd have a purpose, though, once we know what our purpose is going to be, it often is going to relate to our thesis statement when we're writing. For example, perhaps my purpose is to explore whether or not we need a new transit system in the city. Once I've decided whether or not we do, or perhaps the whole point is to pose that question and look at some options, but in either case, the thesis statement can come out of that purpose. Yes, I believe we do need a new transit system in our city. Or no, I don't think we need a new transit system in our city. Those could be effective thesis statements that would begin your essay. Once we know the purpose, we can start thinking about who our audience is. But now sometimes we may know our audience ahead of time. We may know who the audience is going to be before we actually receive the purpose. In any case, the audience is going to be a very crucial, important factor to consider when we're writing or communicating. So no matter if you have a purpose or not, we definitely need to know the audience before we begin to write. If you have a purpose in mind, then once you know your audience, you can kind of tweak what you have to say, what your purpose is going to be, and make it into a suitable format that will be acceptable to your audience. And I want to use the example, something I often do in my classes, of the president. Currently, we have a Democratic president in office, President Barack Obama. Imagine if President Obama has a purpose in mind for a speech. He wants to have a task accomplished. And he goes to the Democratic National Convention to explain what exactly he wants. Okay? Imagine him delivering his speech to that group, to the Democrats, and how they're going to react to what he has to say. Now, both the president and this group are Democrats, so it would would stand to reason that their ideologies would be similar. So the things that he has to say would be welcomed and accepted immediately. He'd probably have a lot of applause, a lot of cheers, and people would be very receptive to the argument that he had to make. Now, if the president takes this same speech and delivers it to a group of Republicans, will it be received the same way? Chances are it probably will not be, because Republicans and Democrats, as we know, have some differing ideologies. Sometimes we're on the opposite side of party lines, and there's some disagreement. Same thing if our former president George Bush attended the Democratic National Convention and presented some of his ideas that had gone over well with the Republicans. It's not going to be received as well. But you can still carry that purpose forward with this group by simply tweaking your purpose a little bit, or tweaking not the purpose, but tweaking the delivery, how you're explaining it to the audience. You may want to start by talking about points where you have common ground. You don't want to alienate or offend your audience, so you want to keep them with you and keep them engaged. So you need to figure out how to get your purpose over without completely offending or completely turning your listener or your reader off by exposing the fact that there may be some differences or differing opinions. You want to try to bring the people in first and then show them your points, show them your ideas. Because you're often going to write in situations where your audience is not going to be immediately in agreement with you. You may have to do some convincing, or it may just be a point of sharing information, explaining what you have to say, knowing that the other side is not really going to be receptive, but at least they can listen in a calm forum. When you're writing your essays, always keep in mind who your audience is going to be. And I would always say avoid considering that your professor as your primary audience. No matter what you're writing, try to think of something broader than just the professor. Don't just write to him or her. At the very least, write to your classmates. Because in life, you're going to write to more people than just your teacher or your instructor. So practice writing to those other audiences, and that will help you learn how to tailor your message to different people. Another example that I have is to think of if you're going to write a letter to someone. Imagine if you write a letter to your best friend that you haven't seen, maybe you didn't see them all summer, him or her. Imagine that you write your best friend a letter explaining what you've done this summer, and you detail everything. Now, could someone take that same letter and send it to your parents, or to your pastor or your rabbi, or to your favorite teacher, or to me, or to your professor? You probably wouldn't want the same information to go to those different people. You would probably want to tailor and tweak that information to make it more palatable or acceptable, or along the lines of something that that group of people would want to read. So those are the types of changes that someone would make, even when you have the same information and you have different audiences that you're delivering it to. Here's some things you might want to consider when you're trying to understand your audience, because we don't want to always assume the audience is like us, okay? But you may want to consider education. You wouldn't want to give a presentation on the benefits of rocket science to a group of kindergartners. They won't understand. So education plays a big factor. Gender also plays a role. Is the group that you're delivering your information to, is it a diverse group? Are they all men? Are they all women? Those things can have an impact. Ethnicity and race can play a role in an audience. Political affiliation, as I showed with my example earlier. Religion, sometimes we get caught up in thinking everyone has the same religious beliefs as we do, and that's not always the case. It rarely ever is. And even if we are of a like religion, our denomination or segment of belief may be different. We may have a different grouping even within that same religion that prevents us from agreeing on certain issues. So you need to remember that when you're thinking about your audience. Sexual orientation also plays a role. You should consider that I think it's 10 to 15% of any given population is going to be homosexual. So consider that if it's relevant to the material that you're covering. Social and economic background also plays a factor. If you're delivering a message to someone who is from a middle-class background, there may be certain cues that you can place inside of the essay that will, appeal to that group. or if they're from the higher upper class or the lower classes. Different elements, different things need to be considered. Age is another factor that plays into this. And there are many others. These are just some examples of various types of audience factors to consider. And once again, never alienate your audience. If you know who your audience is, then there's less chance that you're going to say something to offend them, because once you've offended them, they're tuned out, they're gone forever. Try not to offend them in order to get your point across, and in order to get them to listen to you. Now, here's some things about the occasion. Consider how your communication is going to be delivered, and or the circumstances in which the communication will be received. The method of delivery should influence how you construct your essay. Now, there are going to be different times that you have to do different types of writing or different types of communication, and not all of them are delivered the same way. For example, I've taught this with this presentation, and I'm having to do a lot of talking on my own. If I were doing this in a regular classroom, there would be much more discussion and engagement between myself and my students in order to come to the understanding that I want you to have. But because of the different occasion, I have to do things a little differently. Other types of delivery methods or occasions could be letters, essays, speech, presentations, articles for a newspaper or journal. Just think for a moment how different each of those are. If you're writing someone a letter, there's going to be a lot more personal information included. It's going to have a much more personal feel than an article in a newspaper or journal, for example. And the article for a newspaper is going to have to be written much differently than other things than an essay, because with an article for the newspaper, you want all the main important information to come out in the very first paragraph or the first two paragraphs, because that's how the articles are written for newspapers. You want to have all that important information shot out first, because the article might get cut for advertising to be placed below it, or it may just be cut for space. Essays, however, would have more time to develop and be presented. A speech is going to be different. Do you ever like to be read to? If someone, I always hated whenever I attended meetings and they put up PowerPoint presentations and all they did was read each line to me and never said anything in addition. I can read on my own. So if you're delivering a speech or a presentation, there's going to have to be more interaction that's going to come with the dialogue on the screen. A speech is going to have some more life to it than just someone reading it to you. So consider this as you go forward when you write. Think about what kind of occasion is it? What is the circumstance under which I'm writing? How is the person going to receive this information? Because the way they receive it is going to affect how they absorb it. And there'll be some examples of that in just a minute. I want us to think about the purpose, the audience, and the occasion for the two main readings, Letter from Birmingham Jail and the I Have a Dream speech. The purpose from Letter from Birmingham Jail, it seems to be a response to the appeal made by the clergymen of Alabama that Dr. King and the demonstrators not protest in Birmingham. This was during the Civil Rights Movement. It occurred in 1963. And if you've read this letter, you know that, or the statement, these eight clergymen have addressed Dr. King and asked him not to come to Birmingham because they don't want him to protest, and basically, we don't want you to come here and make trouble. King ultimately does, of course, and he's arrested for causing civil unrest or civil disturbance. And while he's in Birmingham Jail, he writes this letter to the clergy members. And so they're also his audience, the eight clergymen of Alabama. That's who his audience would be, who have requested him not to protest, because his letter, as you read it, is a very meticulous, very well thought out response where he goes point by point and addresses each of the aspects that, or each of the items that these clergymen have laid out of why they don't need him coming out to Birmingham. And he goes through point by point to explain why, yes, he definitely does. Why he's needed there, why there has to be some sort of protest to raise awareness. I think Letter from Birmingham Jail is probably one of the most perfect examples of very effective rhetoric, really strong writing. I recommend that for anyone to read. But this is who his audience is. Now, a broader audience would be everyone who has read that since, or who read that when it was printed in the newspaper, that sort of thing. But the primary audience were these eight clergy members. Now, his occasion, it's an open letter, so it's addressed to the clergyman, but it's also made open for all to read in a public forum. So if it's an open letter, it's usually printed in a newspaper or somewhere public that everyone can see it. And they're allowed to look at it, or he's encouraging them to look at it so they can understand the points he's trying to make as well. But his primary audience, the target audience, were those 8 clergy members. If we think about the I Have a Dream speech, the purpose, audience, and occasions there are a little different. Now, he's still, his purpose here is an appeal for civil rights and equality, which is basically the same purpose he has in Letter from Birmingham Jail, though it's a little more direct towards as a response to the statement that has been made by those clergy members. Okay? The audience here for the I Have a Dream speech, and a lot of people get confused and think, oh, well, that was for everybody in the United States of America. Well, it was, but the primary audience were the participants at the March on Washington, which was held on August 28th of 1963. Those are the people he was targeting immediately. And he knew there would be some repercussions. This speech was going to get out, it was going to be broadcast, but his primary audience was a message of encouragement to those members who were standing out there who had marched on Washington that day, who were hoping for some civil rights actions to be taken place, to take effect, and some changes to be made to the laws. Now, his occasion was the speech, all right? But in giving that speech and considering that occasion, he's also considering the diversity of his audience, and he's considering the audience's circumstance. And I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about all those people who were standing out there. And if you've seen the video, you see there's just throngs of people from all walks of life, very diverse group. He's considering that diversity and that affects and impacts how he tailors his message. Okay? Think about, why is it called the I Have a Dream speech? It's called that because how many times does he repeat over and over and over again? I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. There's that repetition, that effective repetition, because he wants those details to fall into those people's minds, to stick with those people. You know, he only has their attention for a little bit. That also factors into the occasion. These people have marched today. Think about August 28th. You know, I mean, it's in Washington, D.C. We know how hot it is in the South in August. It's not a very comfortable day. People have been standing around. You see there are people there with their children, small children, young adults, old adults, people from, like I said, all walks of life. So he wants to have a message that's going to be picked up immediately and quickly by everyone there. And imagine if you've been standing around outside all day. Could I give a 2-hour lecture and you keep with me and you keep your attention span going? Probably not. So he knows he has to be very brief and succinct in what he has to say. You know, so he's considering their circumstance and how they're receiving the information. Think about how that differs from Letter from Birmingham Jail, because here he even talks about how he's able to sit in the prison cell and write this letter. He has all this time, and he's writing it to these other clergy members who are going to have time to read the letter and go back over it, look at it a second time. A speech is going to happen in an instant. The letter itself is going to be read, reread, considered, pondered, contemplated, so he can be a little more detailed in the things that he can say and what he has. When we're comparing communications between the Letter from Birmingham Jail and the I Have a Dream speech, I want us to think about how the audience is a specific group of individuals with a common background in the Birmingham Jail piece. You know, we said they're all clergymen from Alabama. And think about the fact they're all clergy members. Think about all the examples in Letter from Birmingham Jail that reference back to biblical contexts. You know, he talks about Paul and Jesus. And he can do that with this situation because he knows for a fact that all these people are of a like religious mind, in terms of that they all have a religious background grounded in the Bible. So he uses biblical references to substantiate his own claims, to show them, hey, look, he's a reverend himself. I have some experience. I know what I'm talking about here, and I know you do too, because I know my audience as Christians, people who consider themselves to be Christian. I want you to understand how these are Christian ideals. The occasion also allowed for the message's complexity. Because he's writing a letter, it's a lot easier for him to take his time with his points, be very detailed. Think about how methodical he is with the way he delivers his information, how he develops his points of view, his perspectives. All those things count, and all those things make up for the fact that prove the fact that he has taken into consideration his occasion, so he can be a little more complex. On the other hand, with the I Have a Dream speech, his audience was a vast group from all walks of life. So he's going to have people who may be religious, may not be religious, people who are from all ethnic diversities, all ethnic backgrounds, all genders, various social economic positions. So he doesn't have really a target that he can focus on in terms of, talking about things that everybody's going to know. But what does he focus on? All these people are Americans, so they all know "My country, 'tis of thee." Some of the allusions that he makes to other texts, they'll be aware of those things, and that's what he's focusing on there. The occasion it also required King's words to be brief, succinct, and very memorable. Just think about the occasion, King's words that he's delivering here. He has to be very quick and to the point, but very memorable. So he's giving that repetitive, "I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream." Think about if you've listened to the video or you've watched the video or listened to the audio. Think about the cadence of his voice, how it has there's sort of that pastor's lilt, I guess, that you have to your voice. It's something that's very rhythmic, methodical, something that people can focus on and listen to, but it's very quick. It doesn't last very long, so people can get really motivated. They can listen, pay attention to what's going on, and then take that information away. Well, what was his speech about? He has a dream. That's what people can recall from that. So you see the differences between those two matters and how the occasion of Birmingham Jail is so different from the one in "I Have a Dream." Both messages are very similar, and they're both cries for civil rights and equality, but they're both delivered so differently with their occasion and and awareness of the audience that he can use those two things, the audience and the occasion, to tweak that purpose, the purpose of his message. So now here's some points to remember from this discussion. Before you write, always understand what your purpose, audience, and occasion are. Once you know that, it's easy to begin writing. The purposes often mirror the thesis statement, and both are influenced by your audience and occasion. Know your audience and avoid alienating or offending them. Allow the circumstances of your occasion to dictate how you craft your communication. And once you have your purpose, audience, and occasion, you can then begin the writing process.